We've got it open in a blend file right over here. It's actually quite easy stuff. I'm just going back into the old file, sunglasses right over here. And the first thing that I want to do is make sure that we get a pretty cool looking camera angle. So something like this. And we'll bring in a camera by going Shift A, camera. Let me turn on screencast keys real quickly. Control Alt 0. Going to place this backwards. Then I will increase the focal length to something that is a lat. So something like 100. And then I will place a light right over there. And we're going to make something that looks a little bit premium with a cool looking environment as well. I think this is nice. So let's bring in a area light. Let's shine it at the logo, increase the power so we can actually see what it's doing. And basically we are just going to make a quick and dirty lighting setup at first. And now we have these cool highlights on the Rayban logo. I think that looks pretty cool. Let's also add a light right over here on top. Let's increase the power of this and the exposure just a little bit. So we do get some cool type of gradient going on here. Something like this. Alright, so now we have this black background. I don't think it looks very interesting. So the first step that we can take to make any render look more cinematic and better is to go into the camera, right over here, then go to Viewport Display, Passepartout all the way up, and this way we can only see what's inside of the bounds. Then we're going to enable depth of field, and for this one I'm going to select the icosphere, this little silver thing that we created. It's giving me a hard time. I'm going to decrease the f-stop scale, and what do we have? Now over here it is very sharp, and over here it has this bokeh blur. And I think that looks pretty good. I like to set the blades to 6, just in case when we have those little dots right here, they have 6 of these edges, or corners actually, and that makes it look a bit more cinematic as if it's shot with an actual camera. Now, this of course already looks a lot more cinematic than what we had before. So now we need to make an environment to make this look more premium because it's just a black background. I don't think it looks very appealing or cool. It is pretty cool, but we can do a lot better, don't we? So let's go to the shader editor, Control Shift T, and I will tell you exactly which texture I'm going to be using. It's Rock 34, which you can get on, I think, Texture Haven or HDRI Haven. Maybe I got it from what's it called? Ambient CG. Rock 34. Now I'm going to press A, Principal Texture Setup. And now we have a rock in the background. I think it looks a little bit weird though. So what I want to do is go into Edit mode, which I am right now. I'll press Shift E, make it a bit more straight like this. And I will also bring this upwards so we get the ground a bit more close to our original model. Then I'm going into the UV editor. Go over here into edit mode. Let's make sure that everything of this plane is selected and scale it upwards just a little bit until we get to a pretty cool looking setup. Then go into the shader editor. I'm going to place a color ramp right over here because I want to make it darker. I'm going to increase the darkness in this like so. And perhaps we can light this up even more later on. But for now, I think we are up to a great start. It already has a bit more depth and detail than what we had before. So I think that's pretty cool. Now for the next step, I'm actually going to bring in a cube, and this cube will be a volumetric. I'm going to scale this up like so. Go into the shader editor, press new, then go to the principled volume or add a principled volume. Right here, volume into the volume. And now we have this even block of mist. And I don't really like the way this looks. So what I'm going to do is bring in a noise texture, Control T, Object. Let's bring this into a color ramp, plug it in, color into the density. And now, if we play around with this, so bring the black slider all the way to the right, we get something that looks pretty cool and randomized. So I think that's a nice way to add some extra detail. We might increase the scale and then play around with this a bit more. We don't need that much of it, so we can also set it to, I don't know, 5 or something. I'm going to increase the detail, play around with these roughness values. And this is just a game of finding what you like. Now maybe bringing it backwards just a little bit so it's not too much in front of the product. So now we have some more detail right here, and we can actually change the color. So maybe we can make it bluish, make it very blue, or less blue. We can also play around with the anisotropy, which will increase or decrease the way the lighting is interacting with our volume. All right, so now we have this. Looks pretty cool as well. So there's only 2 or 3 more elements to go. I'm going to bring in a cube, and I'm going to bring this cube upwards. Then I will go into edit mode. I will place a loop cut right in the middle. S and Z, this can go up. And then I will take this side and the underside, S and Y, and bring this inwards. Now that looks pretty cool already. Now all we need to do is scale it down and S and Z, and we have a pretty cool looking spike. Now I'm going into the material and I will delete the principal BSDF, add a glass BSDF, glass into the surface, and now we have a pretty cool looking glass. Very simple stuff. Now in order to make this glass look a little bit better, I'm going to bring in a noise texture with Ctrl T, object into the vector, add a color ramp, vector into the vector, color into the roughness. Oftentimes we do things that are pretty similar, aren't they? So let's increase the scale, the detail, and the roughness. And now we need to play around with this slider in order to make it look a bit more rough and jagged. Maybe something like this. And then we can change the white color to be something a bit darker and have it be very subtle, so it doesn't have to be that extreme. Then I'm going into edit mode and I will simply duplicate this, rotate it, maybe play around with the scale just a little bit. R and Z. Let's make another one, something like this. And perhaps this should go on the x-axis a bit more, so we have some 3D-ishness going on, 3D-ishness. And then I will add another one, and the middle one should always be a little bit bigger, doesn't it? There you go. Make sure it's randomized enough. I feel like this one could be a bit more like this. And now we have a cool looking ice crystal. So let's bring the crystal right over here. We can bring it into the back, scale it up, scale it down, do with it whatever you like. I think this adds quite a bit of detail and cool looking reflections in the background. Of course you can add more of these, so let's simply duplicate this. Yeah, this one, shift the X, rotate it around on the Z axis, make sure it is not really visible that it's the same. There you go. Something like this, and then we get some more cool reflections and an interesting looking background. So there's only 2 more steps to go. We are now going to create some procedural rock with gold in it. So let's first bring in a UV sphere. Let's click on dash, auto smooth, new material, and let's add a noise texture. Once again, Ctrl T, object, vector in the vector, Ctrl Q, that's my shortcut, vector into the vector of the color ramp and the color ramp into the roughness, into the base color actually. So I'm going to change this color to a bit of a goldish tone, somewhere over here. And for now, what we want to do is increase the detail, increase the roughness, and increase the scale a bit, like so. And actually what we're going to make is a separation between certain areas where it's going to be gold and certain areas where it's not. By the way, I was a bit too quick. I'm actually going to make this white, so decrease the saturation. Now add a mix color right over here, and we're going to use this as the vector for our colors. And the bottom color, you guessed it, will be a gold type color. Increase the metallic, decrease the roughness. And now if we make this a black color, we can see what our color ramp is doing. So we can play around with this like so, bring this in, bring the whites out, and decrease the scale. I actually want it to be some big parts and some smaller parts. Yeah, some rock. The black will be rock and the other side will be gold. First thing I'm going to do is bring in a bump map simply so we can see how this is going to look. So color into the height, bump into the normal, increase the filter width and increase the distance. Let's see what we got. It's starting to look a bit more, what can we call it, rock-like. Of course, decrease the roughness all the way. We want this to be quite reflective. Now, of course, the top slot of this is not going to be just a black color. We have to make a rock material. So I'm going to bring in a noise texture, and actually, I will bring in another one as well. Ctrl T, object into the vector. Let's add a color ramp as well. Let's place the vector into this vector and this vector into the color ramp. And let's have a look at what this looks like. So increase the scale, increase the detail, play around with the roughness. Let's decrease the scale, increase the detail, and let's play around with the roughness. Now, if we increase this, we are starting to get a rock looking like texture. Very simple stuff. And what we can do is actually add another noise texture. Why not? Let's increase the scale by a lot. And let's have a look at this. It looks pretty rock-like to me. And one more thing that we can do, if you like to do that, is grab another noise texture, once again, vector into the scale, and this vector into the distortion, and then this vector into the lacunarity. Who knows? Pick some random slots, you will find something that looks cool and interesting and like a rock. And then we can play around with the scale, of course, in whatever manner or fashion you would like. So I'm going to bring this into number A. And now we already have something that looks like a rock, but it is also very rough, which means that it's reflecting a lot. I only want the gold to be reflective. I don't want this stone material to be reflective. All right. So what do we have? We have this original setup. And this is exactly what we need for our roughness. But as you can see, the white area is the gold. And white is roughness set to 1, which means that it will not be reflective at all. So we have to invert this color as well. So invert color, place it right in there, and place this into the roughness. And I think it didn't do a great job, actually. No, it didn't change it around. Interesting. Not really doing it in the way that I expected. So there is a different method. I'm going to hover my mouse over this color, Control C. Let's plug B into A and Control V this gold color into A. And now what we've effectively done is changed or flip around the materials, but as we can see, it doesn't really look that nice. So once again, I'm going to play around with this and make sure that we have more of that rock and less of the gold. So something like this. Play around with it until you get something you think looks adorable. Something like this should probably do the trick. Now we're going to place this color ramp into the roughness, and as my predictions told me, this is still rough, so the gold is still fairly rough and the stone should not be rough at all. Now of course we can change some colors in this stone. We can also make the dark area a bit more grayish. Or we can simply add another one by clicking on plus and playing around with these values to get some variation in our rock patterns. Of course, we can do that over here as well. So maybe this should be a bit more dark, like so. And now we're starting to get a pretty cool looking texture. Let's play around with the strength in the bump. And now we've got a rock-like material with some gold in it. Now if we really want to crank this up, there's another way to do it. I'm not entirely sure if I want to do that actually. So let's add a displacement. Right over here, go to the material properties, go down, settings, and instead of bump only, use displacement and bump. Then for this color ramp, we're going to plug it into the height and displacement into the displacement. And now if you play around with the scale, it's actually going out or in, but we don't have that much geometry. It's actually just a simple sphere. So if you want to make this a little bit better, we can simply add a Control 4 level of subdivision. And then when we play around with this, it will look a bit more aggressive. All right, and we can also add a color ramp right before this and play around with these colors in order to make it less extreme. Very cool looking material. So that's a quick procedural tutorial right in between there. And now, as you can see in this light, we have some pretty cool and reflective gold, but we also have stone. I think this looks pretty cool. So let's go over here. Let's add a displace. Displace right there, new. Click on this button, select clouds, or maybe let's select Musgrave. And then we can increase or decrease the size, depending on what you like for your result. I think something like this might do the trick. Increase the nabla and play around with the dimension and lacunarity in order to get to the type of result that you think looks really cool. So intensity down just a little bit, and now we've got a bit of an, what do you call it? ore, like an ore, gold ore from the mine. And we can go into the modifiers and play around with the strength of this some more. Looks pretty cool. And now for all that work that we've done, I'm simply going to scale it up a bit and place it in the background. Something like this. And since it's out of focus, we're not going to see too much of it anyways. But still, I think it looks pretty cool. You can also make it smaller. I don't think it should take too much attention away from what we've got going on here. So I like it like this. Cool. Now for the final part, let's add a particle system, because if you break things into 3 layers, it will usually make it better. Very simple stuff. Let's add a plane. Let's add a plane. Let's go to the particle system, emission, and let's add 10,000 particles. We're going to do that later on. First of all, I'm going to set the lifetime to 200. Lifetime randomization doesn't really need to be turned on. And let's make a icosphere. Icosphere, right over here. Plus, let's make it goldish, like so. Metallic up, roughness down, and shaded auto smooth. Then I'm going to make another one. It's going to be way smaller, something like this. And give it its own material. And we're going to perhaps make it a bit more dark or bright, depending on your mood for the day. Should be just a little bit different than the other one. That's the point. Then another one, scale it to a middle size, give it a new material, and perhaps this one is a bit of a different type of gold, but ever so slightly, never too much. Something like this, increase the roughness a bit, and then we're going to select all of these 3. Let's place it into a balls collection. Why not? Let's play around with these balls. So let's go over here to our particle system. And then under the particle settings, under render, we can set the render as to collection. And which collection? Well, you guessed it. It's going to be the balls collection. And now if we click on play, it is going to fall down and it doesn't look very interesting, if I have to be honest here. Let's click pick random. Let's scale randomization all the way up. So we have this particle system, but I feel like it should be coming from the side. And then we're going to blow a small wind towards that area. We're also going to decrease the amount of gravity because it's falling way too fast. I want it to be something very slow and smooth. So right over here under field weights, I'm going to decrease the gravity to something like 0.26. Let's see what it does. Yeah, this might work out. Perhaps still a bit too fast. You can set it to 0.1, for example. All right, and then we'll just start the animation from over here. So that's not a big problem. I'm simply going to place a force field. It's going to be wind. I'm going to set the wind on the RY, this area, maybe blowing upwards ever so slightly. Who knows? Perhaps it looks cool. See what it does. It is already going. Yeah. It's dying too quickly. So let's increase the timeline length. Let's go into the particles and increase the lifetime to 500 or something. Right over here, we got our cool little blobs. Let's go to the render scale. I want this to be very small and I want it to be a lot. We're going to do that later on. So right now we got some pretty cool looking gold dust in this nice looking crystal environment with our cool looking gold in the background and our blue type of smoke. Now there's 2 more things that we're going to do. We're going to animate a light over this side and we're going to animate the camera. So let's first animate the camera. We want to make sure that's right because the way the lighting interacts with an object is dependent on your view from the camera, so that's important to always do the camera first. So let's go over to the curve circle and let's add it right over here. Let's have a look at our camera. Where is it? It's quite far. Let's scale it up somewhere over here. Then go to the object constraints, follow path. Let's place it on our beautiful looking curve. This one. And now it's going to be placed somewhere far into the scene. So we need to click on N, go to Item and set all of these locations to 0. And then we should have it on the correct spot. Now, of course, there's another problem because the camera is now not facing our object. In order to solve that, we are going to add a track to constraint, which means that we can track the camera towards a specific object. And what do we have? We have already got the depth of field on this little silver button or whatever it is. And we can also place that right over here for our track to constraint. So in that way, everything that is in focus is also going to be the middle point of the camera. I'm having a tough time selecting things with my picker tool today. So I'm going all the way over here. I can't fill now. All right, cool. Let's have a look at the constraints and play around. All right, not bad, not bad. But I think we can also do a bit better. So let's find our circle. Nah, that's too much ground. I don't like there to be too much ground. Okay, we're going to do it slightly different. I want this entire sunglass to be in the frame. And I also want to take into account that I want to leave some space. Because later on in DaVinci Resolve, which is the final step that we're going to be doing for this tutorial, is add a film look generator, which will make this look even cooler. So let's go over to the camera. And instead of using this as the track to constraint, I'm simply going to place the 3D cursor right here, add a new empty. It's going to be arrows, and this way we can separate this one from the other one, for example. Go to the camera, select the arrows empty for the track to constraint. So if I type empty, it's probably this one. There you go. And now if we play around with this, we can determine where the camera is looking, and now we get a pretty good looking vision for this. Cool. Let's scale the Bezier circle up a bit. And let's go into the constraints of the camera and actually make an animation for this. So what we could do, I find that it's a bit too empty right over there. Perhaps that's just me. Maybe you don't agree at all. But I think we can also add one more of those crystals. Right over there. Yeah, just gives it a little bit more flair, a little bit more interesting stuff going on. I'm going to start from frame 243, place a keyframe right there by pressing I on this offset value. Then I want this to be approximately 72 frames. So that's 3 seconds. Play around with the offset like this. And I want it to go over here. Press I. And now it's basically the game of trying to find the right look for this render. I think this looks pretty cool, but our camera animation is not done yet. Let's go over into the graph editor by pressing Ctrl Tab. And of course this one, when it comes in slowly, then moves faster and then it's going slow. I guess it's alright, but I like it the other way around. So I'm going to select both of these handles, S and Y, flip them like this, and don't make sure that you're not getting this area where it's completely flat, because then the camera will just stop and start going again. I don't really like that. I'm simply going to make sure that it's fast in the beginning, going slow, and fast near the end. S and X. Yeah, so it's giving us some time. If we look at this animation, shoo. Yeah, so I made a mistake. So look right over there. Yeah, so it's coming in fast, going slowly. It's actually coming to a full halt, I feel. Anyway, you need to play around with that. I don't want to waste you guys' time. All I'm going to do is go right over here. We can either leave the gold dust to what it is right now, or we can also increase the amount to 10,000. See what that looks like. So open up the cache, bake this, will take a couple of seconds. I think that also looks pretty cool. I don't know, it's dependent on taste. You can do with that whatever you like. I think I'm going to do 2500. Let's bake this. Yeah, just a little bit more, but not too much. Alright, so that's basically it for this animation. I'm going to render out a single frame and I will show you how I finish this off in DaVinci Resolve. Alright, so right now I am in DaVinci Resolve and we can simply color grade this image. This is the first render I got out of it. Looks pretty cool. I do think there are some improvements to be made, but you can play around with this in whatever fashion you like in order to get that premium look. For now, I'm simply going to explain how to color grade this. So selecting a node right here, we're going to press Alt-S. I always like to keep the first node empty. I'm going to keep this node and bring in a film look creator. It's a special node in DaVinci Resolve. I'm not sure if it's also coming with the free version, but I do know that I have it in the studio version. Set the presets to cinematic, and instead of core look cinematic, we're going to use Rochester. And Rochester usually gives it a better split toning ability. I think it looks very nice. Now, the render is quite dark, so I'm also going to increase the exposure quite a bit so that the viewer can actually see what's going on here. Now, I also think that the split tone can sometimes be increased. Not all the time, but sometimes that is the case. So now we have a bit more blue right here. Let's turn it on and off. You can already see a very big difference going on here. And I also believe that the grain is oftentimes too much. So if you zoom into this and we turn off the grain, it is adding quite a bit of grain, and especially if you have an animation, it's going to be way too much. So I'm simply going to set the amount to a lower value where we can still see it, but it's not as aggressive anymore. So I think this looks good, gives it that small camera edge. Then for the film gate, we might want to increase or decrease the vertical depending on how big your model fits into the screen. What you can also do is go back into edit mode and place it upwards. I think this looks pretty good already. We have the halation, which could be improved a little bit. I think I'm going to shine a light more from the side here and make sure that we have this halation, because if you look at this edge, it already looks pretty cool, but I think it's a bit underwhelming on the logo. I don't know, we cannot change anything, unfortunately. So I will have to do another render of this in order to make it look good. No problem, we're going to do that anyways. So now that we have got this, I've got an entire video on this node, by the way. And all the other things I explained, such as the vignette, the halation, the bloom, grain, flickers, stuff like that, it's all in the 33 photorealism video, which you definitely should check out. Right here we have the global blend. You can increase or decrease this. I like the way this looks. And now for the final finishing touch, what we can do is go into the Fusion tab and add a lens distortion. So add a lens distort node right here. Actually, I always use the lens distortion, not the lens distortion lens. So like this, should be very subtle, something like so. And bring in a transform node, scale this up just a little bit. And finally, I also like to add a prism blur. So decrease the blur strength, the aberration distance should be very low. Let's decrease the strength to a very low value as well. Let's zoom this in until we can actually see quite a bit. There you go. We now have this cool looking RGB type of effect around the edges. Let's have a look at the final result. I think that looks pretty cool. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you learned a thing or two about cinematic backgrounds. In the next video, we're going to do something interesting as well. And if there's something else that's coming up, it's right over here. We're going to add this kind of animation. I think it looks pretty cool. And it's going to be a partially 3D and partially AI integration for this shot. I think it looks pretty cool. Either way, I'd like to ask you to click on subscribe, and I will see you in the next video where we're going to create this. So I'll see you there.